3, 2, 1, and we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the THatch Podcast, where we have open and in-depth conversations about the things that you and I care about. I am Tyler Hatch, your host on the THatch Podcast, and today we're going to be looking at Game 4 of the NBA Finals, as well as a preview, yet another one, of the 2019 NBA free agency. We had a hot trade go down very recently between the Brooklyn Nets and the Atlanta Hawks, trading Allen Crabbe along with some draft picks to clear cap space. I will get into the details later in the podcast, because first, I want to focus on Game 4 of the NBA Finals, give you my takeaways and what it means for the rest of the series. Obviously, on my last episode of the podcast, I did talk quite a bit about what it would mean if Toronto won Game 4. Now, when we look at the series, it's a 3-1 lead for the Toronto Raptors. And to recap the game for you, Toronto wins last night in Golden State. Last game of the homestand at Oracle, 105-92, the final score. Again, Toronto Raptors defeating the Golden State Warriors, 105-92. A lot of people are going to talk about Serge Ibaka and how great of a game he had. He's playing amazing. He's stepping up. And what I saw out there from watching the game is Serge Ibaka was quite often the beneficiary of Golden State's mediocre defense in this series. This is the kind of defense they've been playing that let Pascal Siakam go off in Game 1. This is the kind of defense they were playing that let Danny Green and Kyle Lowry kill them from 3 in Game 3. And now we see Serge Ibaka ends up being the beneficiary in Game 4 because the Warriors just simply don't have people to rotate into the spots that they're used to rotating into. Their lineup is so shortened by their health scare at the moment. Just to give you an idea, they've got 3 DNP coach decisions, which I find a little questionable considering the guys they're throwing out there. So the 3 guys who didn't play by Steve Kerr's decision were Jordan Bell, Jacob Evans, and Jonas Jerebko. Now, I don't have any complaints about Jacob Evans not playing. He, just like many of these guys, is not ready for this moment, and that's no slight on him. You know, he's a guy who was drafted toward the bottom of the draft, and he's a young guy on a team that's in a spot that he would never be in if he didn't get drafted to the Golden State Warriors specifically. So no problem with him not playing. Jordan Bell, I would like to see him get some minutes. You know, obviously he's kind of been hyped up as the guy who can come in and approximate Draymond Green, hopefully develop into another type of Draymond Green guy. And he's not even getting any minutes via coach's decision. If he's injured, it's a whole nother thing. Jonas Jerebko as well, I think, could have helped them a little bit, not a lot. The big thing I'm seeing in this series is size matters against the Warriors, especially now with Kevin Durant injured, because that gets rid of the other shot blocker in the equation for Golden State. Now what you're seeing is on these pick and rolls when the defense is getting collapsed, when Toronto is doing a terrific job up top, the guy who's rotating from the side is usually Kevin Durant. Now it's Steph Curry. So we're going from a guy who is a 7-foot shot blocker, incredibly mobile. He's going to be able to get to the spot and do something once he gets there, to Steph Curry, who we all have questions about his defense purely based upon his frame. That's the biggest question about his defense, is his ability to stay in front of a guy, stay with him, and make a play on the ball. Now you're asking him to do that against power forwards, centers, small forwards. It's not going to be good. And what we saw was Serge Ibaka being the beneficiary of the poor defensive schemes, or I would say the poor defensive adjustments of the Warriors. They're playing defense the way that they've played it all year, which, great, it worked for most of the year. But you also had Kevin Durant for most of the year. And he's the guy, he's that extra shot blocker that makes it possible. Now, if Boogie Cousins, if he could give you a legitimate effort, play some real minutes, that might change things. If he was not locked to the ground by these injuries, that might change things. But what's happening with Boogie Cousins is he played just under 15 minutes in game 4, whereas Steph Curry, 43 minutes, Klay Thompson, 42 minutes, Draymond Green, almost 41 minutes. These guys were playing the bulk of the minutes. Even Andre Iguodala, who everyone is acknowledging is bumped and bruised, he's hindered out there. He's playing 38 minutes for this team. Boogie's only playing 15. If Boogie was in the shape to play those minutes like these other guys are playing, all of a sudden this is a different game. All of a sudden you've got some size out there on the floor that can at least make things tough. The Warriors don't have that right now. And what tells me they don't have that is they played Andrew Bogut 11 minutes. This is a guy, if you've been watching these games, he looks like he's stuck in quicksand out there trying to move. He looks like he's got cinder blocks tied to his feet instead of shoes. The guy does not belong on an NBA court in the pressurized moment that is the NBA Finals. He's just not that guy anymore. He was that guy when they won the first championship, and he was 4 or 5 years younger. Sure, not now. Not Andrew Bogut. These Warriors are too injured, they're too hobbled, and they've been too slow on adjustments to beat this Warriors team, to beat this Raptors team. What I've seen from this Raptors team this entire series is that not only one guy is going to step up, like I said, it needs to happen for them to win, but multiple guys are stepping up every game. You can count on having either Siakam or Lowry not just showing up, but going off in every other game. So one of those guys is going to be there. Then you have a Serge Ibaka step up tonight and take advantage very well, I should say. It's not just that, he was in the right spot at the right time because Nick Nurse knows how to pick apart the Warriors. He was doing some work out there. He made some great passes. He put himself in the right spots. He was hustling. His defense was impeccable. So Serge had a great game. Don't take anything I've said as a criticism of Serge. So he's stepping up. We saw game 3, Danny Green stepped up. Marc Gasol stepped up game 3. These guys are all coming to play. Fred VanVleet has looked like a guy who should be starting for some NBA teams out there. He reminds me of Darren Williams right now. Shout out to any of the Utah fans that have fond memories of Darren Williams. Still mad about you getting rid of Jerry Sloan. We'll move on. Kawhi Leonard looked great. 36 points. He had 4 steals, a block, 12 rebounds. In typical Kawhi fashion, he only had 2 assists. I don't expect much there in that department, even in this setting. He's just not a natural playmaker. He's got the basketball IQ to be a very good playmaker, but he's not a natural great playmaker, and I've covered that plenty. What we look at now for the Warriors, as I was talking about after game 3, is they essentially put themselves in a position after game 3 to where they had to win 3 games in a row to win the NBA Finals. Because if you look at the realistic road to do that, from game 3, it was win in Oracle in game 4, because that's a home game. We can win that. Hopefully win on the road in game 5 in Toronto, and then we can close it out on our home court in game 6 back at Oracle. So we had to win 3 straight, but we got 2 of them at home. Now, by giving up game 4, now you're stuck in the position where you still have to win 3 games in a row to have a chance to win the series, but 2 of them are in Toronto. Now you're headed to Toronto for game 5 with all the momentum in their favor. They might close them out in game 5, but if you survive that, now you go back to Oracle. You have to defend your home court, where you just gave up 2 straight, I should add. You have to defend your home court, And then after that, you still have to go back to Toronto for a game 7 on the biggest stage, where we've seen the fans are going to show up, the team is going to show up, and Kawhi is going to step up in the biggest moment. I think it's almost impossible for the Warriors to win at this point. If there is a team that could come up from 3-1, the Warriors would be that team, but not without Kevin Durant. It's going to take a Herculean effort to win Game 5 in Toronto, even to give you a chance to have Kevin Durant come back, which I don't even think is going to happen. Personally, I think he tore his Achilles, and for whatever reason, Golden State doesn't want to let that out to the world, but I think that's what happened. So now they're in a situation where it's almost impossible to win. I think Toronto comes away with this series, and it may be in Game 5. We'll see. I think it's either going to be finished up in Game 5 or it's going to go the distance to 7. However, unless Kevin Durant does come back for those last few games, I don't even know if they close out a Game 6 in Oracle, if they can even get there. Obviously, if you end up at that Game 6 in Oracle, that means they had to win Game 5. Maybe that gives them the momentum they need. I don't see it happening. So with 3 games to close them out, 2 of those chances in Toronto, I think Toronto gets the job done. So that's my roundup of Game 4 of the NBA Finals, what it means moving forward. Want to get into a little bit of free agent speculation, talk about recent trades that have happened, specifically with the Brooklyn Nets, and what that means for the whole free agent landscape, what it means for other teams around the NBA, not just the Atlanta Hawks, not just the Brooklyn Nets. So, quick drink of water. We'll get into the story. So on, I believe it was Thursday. Let me check the date here. But the Brooklyn Nets traded Allen Crabbe to the Atlanta Hawks. Trade Allen Crabbe. There we go. Don't know why it's giving me a picture of Damian Lillard, but there you have it. So it's essentially a move to clear his $18.5 million in cap space. So here's the full trade for you. The Nets are sending the number 17 pick in the 2019 NBA draft and a 2020 lottery protected first round pick to the Atlanta Hawks for small forward Taurean Prince and a 2021 second round pick. So essentially what this means for the Brooklyn Nets, they were coming into the offseason they had one max cap slot in hand, and they had this path to create a second max cap slot. This is them taking that step. Allen Crabbe was the guy that needed to be moved to open up that cap slot. So now you're looking at a reality where Brooklyn has already made the power move. And what's making them do that? Well, all indications are there's headlines all over, rumors everywhere that Kyrie Irving is going to sign with the Brooklyn Nets in free agency. It's basically out there. This is an interesting discussion. This brings me to another tangent that I'll want to touch on in another podcast, but I think this is a interesting way to look at the tampering rules in the NBA, where we see Doc Rivers just got fined for answering a question about Kawhi Leonard in the NBA Finals, and yet it can essentially be a done deal that Kyrie Irving is going to Brooklyn. They're already making trades on behalf of basically the fact that they know that. And that's not tampering. Nobody's getting fined there. Doesn't make sense to me. So that tampering can be a whole nother discussion for a whole nother podcast, maybe I'll do a podcast about NBA rule changes that I would like to see, additions I think they could make to the game. So that'll be an interesting topic for another podcast. But with this trade, with Brooklyn opening up that second cap slot, we know we can slot Kyrie into one of those. I am 95% confident this is what's happening. So we slot Kyrie Irving in there. Who takes up that other spot? Because this is what I'll tell you. D'Angelo Russell, the Nets all-star this year that they traded for not long ago, D'Angelo Russell, he's a restricted free agent. So what that means for anyone who doesn't know is he is a free agent. He can go negotiate with other teams, agree to terms on a deal, but the Brooklyn Nets get the option to match that deal and keep him on the team. So essentially going into the offseason, they could have signed Kyrie Irving and kept D'Angelo Russell, because under the current cap rules, you can go over the salary cap to retain a player who was already on your team. Now we're looking at a reality where them clearing this extra cap space says essentially that they're not going to re-sign D'Angelo Russell. Because if they were going to re-sign D'Angelo Russell, why would you trade away 2 first-round picks to get rid of a guy who was going into the last year of his deal? It's because you have to make a move with that cap space now, or at least that's the way the Nets see it. So Kyrie Irving's going in. The speculation all year has been about Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant meeting up at a destination in free agency. Everyone thought it was going to be the New York Knicks. Some people, for whatever reason, thought it could be the LA Clippers. However, I never believed that from Kyrie, because he's a guy who's wanted to play in New York and grew up a Nets fan. I struggle to see how people didn't see something like this coming. Now, I personally did make, I don't know if it was a prediction, but the suggestion that Kyrie should go play with LeBron on the Lakers. But for Kyrie, if it's more important to him to be a leader on a team, to be the guy or 1A instead of number 2, because if he's on a team with Kevin Durant will be 1, Kyrie will be 1A. And if he's on a team with LeBron is number 1, Kyrie is number 2. That's how it is on every LeBron team, no matter who the other player is. LeBron is number 1, and you're number 2. Get used to it. That didn't work for Kyrie, long term, that is, in his eyes. So going to Brooklyn can provide him that, and he can go home, and he can play for his favorite franchise. Pretty simple to me. I can definitely see it. I think it's going to happen. I think that's also where Kevin Durant goes. They form a pseudo super team. I'm not going to call it a super team until you get a third, fourth guy. But they form a formidable duo in the East, better than, I would argue, any other duo in the East. So they take control of the Eastern Conference, and Kevin Durant and both Kyrie Irving can start building up their empires that they've wanted to build. So I think it makes sense. On the Atlanta Hawks side of the trade, it's pretty simple. What I have to take on 1 year of this guy's salary and cap space that nobody was going to take anyway, and I get 2 first-round picks, yeah, I'll do that. No brainer. It's an awesome trade for the Hawks to come away with not just 1, but 2 first-round picks in that move. So props to Atlanta in that. Brooklyn, it's risky. This is really risky. But I think they've got Kyrie in the bag. Hopefully, for them, that is, they can recruit Kevin Durant. Now looking at the impact that this trade has around the league, well, the first piece that I really want to look at is Kevin Durant, because he's the guy that really is pivotal for this entire free agency, this entire 2019 free agency. His move is going to change the landscape of the NBA, no matter how you slice it. Whether he stays in Golden State, whether he goes east, whether he goes to the Clippers, whatever Kevin Durant does, that is going to drastically shift the landscape in the NBA. It's going to drastically change how GMs decide to build their teams, how aggressive people are. And it's also going to drive decisions of other players and other teams on where people play. So this is going to have a huge impact. Everyone all year has been speculating that Kevin Durant wants to go play with the New York Knicks. He wants to take over that franchise and restore them to glory. However, I would argue there's not really any glory about that New York Knicks franchise to begin with. And I just don't see it. I don't see Kevin Durant wanting to get involved with all of the drama that is James Dolan. Kevin Durant just got done having this media circus around him simply because he was going to be a free agent. Now you look at that New York Knicks market with James Dolan, Mr. Inconsistency himself, in that media market where all they do is kill people, let's be real, in a metaphorical sense, obviously. But if Kevin Durant fails with the New York Knicks, which I would argue having James Dolan being there essentially effing things up every year, you're not going to have success there. So it would cannibalize your career. It would further cannibalize the Knicks because, they got Kevin Durant and they couldn't even win. I think the Knicks made a horrible move trading away Kristaps Porzingis, and I think they're going to come away in this free agency with maybe Jimmy Butler and Kemba Walker. And I think Kemba's going to stay in Charlotte and get a supermax, so maybe not Kemba Walker. So you got Jimmy Butler, and I mean, hey, let's throw a max at Malcolm Brogdon. Or maybe D'Angelo wants to keep living in New York. But who's really going to take those pitches? Because a Jimmy Butler and a lesser star-led team, not going to get it done. Not even in the East. So now the Knicks are stuck in a situation where they have to hit a home run or they're going to strike out. And this is a position where if they strike out, how many times in a row have the New York Knicks struck out? And this is going to be the biggest strikeout in years, I would argue, over a decade for the New York Knicks, because you're getting rid of Kristaps Porzingis. Let's not forget, this is an under 23, 7'3" unicorn that can move around the court, block shots. Oh, and let's not forget, he can hit three-pointers from distance as if he were Steph Curry. It's absurd to get rid of a guy like that simply to open cap space. It makes no sense. So I don't think Kevin Durant's going to the Knicks. I don't think Kevin Durant wants to go to LA with the Clippers. Everyone speculates it'll be with Kawhi, and share that spotlight as well as try and compete with the show that is the Lakers and LeBron James in the same building. I don't think Kevin Durant wants that. So I do think he lands with the Brooklyn Nets with Kyrie Irving. That means D'Angelo Russell is a floater. So he's the next guy I want to talk about. He's a guy who had his first All-Star appearance this year. I would argue he was the most improved player in the NBA. However, very close discussion between him and Pascal Siakam, who we're seeing have a amazing performance after amazing performance in the NBA Finals. But with D'Angelo Russell, he's finally showing the potential that I knew was there since the kid was drafted. You can see his vision for the game. I really think he's going to be Chris Paul minus the attitude, plus a couple inches of height and a little more athleticism. He's got a very well-rounded game for a point guard. Obviously, we know D'Angelo for scoring, for shooting. Great three-point shooter off the dribble, off the pick and roll. Any way you want to slice it, he's a great three-point shooter. Couple that with the fact that outside of Chris Paul, D'Angelo Russell was probably the best mid-range scorer outside of Kevin Durant, that is. Because, let's face it, he's 7 feet tall with all the same skills that D'Angelo Russell is using to score. But he's one of the most effective mid-range players in the NBA, and of course, we've seen he can get to the rim. He can push it in transition, and he can lock down on defense when he needs to. He has the physical tools. He's not a guy that's going to give you great defense for 82 games, but in a playoff series or in crunch time, when he needs to lock down, he can. D'Angelo's a great player, I would argue deserving of a max anywhere he goes. And guess whose name's in the ring? My very favorite Utah Jazz, my man Donovan Mitchell. I've got 2 jerseys hanging in that closet over there. My man Donovan Mitchell is hitting up D'Angelo Russell. He's recruiting him. He wants him to come to Utah. D'Angelo, please come to Utah. We need you. And what we will provide to you is a team that will give you a legitimate shot to win. When I say that, what do I think an NBA team needs to win? I think you need a true number one option, which I would argue is that MVP level guy. My argument is that Donovan Mitchell could become that guy, and I'm going to get into that full discussion when I do my under 23 MVP caliber list. There's a little sneak peek for you. But I would argue Donovan Mitchell can become that guy. I would argue Rudy Gobert, he's already on my all-NBA caliber list, so he's fine as a number 2 on your team. Then you're telling me D'Angelo Russell gets to be my number 3, a guy who is already an all-star, and guess who doesn't have an all-star game appearance? Donovan Mitchell, the guy who I think would be the number 1 on that team. I think that's a team that could compete for championships in a reality where Kevin Durant has left the Golden State Warriors. There's also speculation, a couple other teams on the list for D'Angelo Russell. There is the possibility he could go to the crosstown rival in the New York Knicks. I just told you how I don't think that's going to happen. He could go play with the Orlando Magic. You tell me how attractive playing for the Orlando Magic is, especially when there's no guarantee that Nikola Vucevic is going to be back. The other name in the ring is the Indiana Pacers, which I think are an intriguing option. Playing next to Victor Oladipo would be, quite the exciting specter, as well as Miles Turner. But I think you've got 2 higher upside guys who are already better, at least in the case of Gobert versus Turner, with Utah, where you've got Donovan Mitchell, you've got Gobert. Personally, I would pick them plus the surrounding cast, plus the culture and the coaching of the Jazz versus Victor Oladipo, Miles Turner, and the Pacers, especially with the Pacers having so many free agents headed into this offseason. We'll see if they decide to sign a lot of them back or if they decide to let a lot of them walk and make a play for a big free agent like that. But this trade, to me, opens the door for the Utah Jazz to get D'Angelo Russell, which I think, looking at this free agent pool, is the only name out there that is realistic for Utah to get, but is also good enough with a high enough upside to truly let them compete for a championship. If they got a Tobias Harris, like I've talked about in the past, instead of D'Angelo Russell, I think they get to competitive territory. I think it gets to kind of the Denver Nuggets discussion where it's, okay, when are they going to get to a conference finals? It's kind of a foregone conclusion that it's going to happen someday. But with D'Angelo Russell, to me, that becomes, okay, this is a team to watch. When are they going to compete for a championship? So that being said, that kind of wraps up my comments on that trade between the Nets and the Hawks. That's really going to do it for today's podcast. So before you guys click out of the podcast, I just want to say thank you for listening, especially if you got this far through. As well as if you guys enjoy the podcast, enjoy what I'm doing, let me know some topics you might want me to talk about. As well as please share this with anybody that you think may enjoy the podcast. It makes a huge difference for me when you share this video, because it gets me in front of so many eyes that I would never be in front of before. So please help me out with that. I'm going to let you get back to your day on the THatch Podcast. This has been Tyler Hatch. Peace.